Good evening. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order of Monday, March the 9th. Deputy Mayor, are there any agenda additions?
Brent, can you move the screen up a bit? I'm still logging in here. Okay. There are two agenda additions this evening, Your Worship. Notice of hearings of the Committee of Adjustment and Planning staff reports for March 10th, 2020 Committee of Adjustment meeting, and two, a presentation by Kelly Martel, MHBC Planning Limited, to provide an update on the Affordable and Rental Housing Community Improvement Plan, CIP. Action recommended that the matters be added to the agenda.
Discussion? All in favor? Carried. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interest, members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Larmer.
Next, Your Worship, members of council, we have presentations. And first, we have Kelly Martel of MHBC Planning Limited to provide an update on the Town of Cobourg Affordable Housing and Rental Housing Community Improvement Plan, the CIP.
And Kelly, welcome once again to our chambers. I know you were part of our specialized night with our community as well, so certainly great to have you back, and we look forward to your presentation.
Turn it on there.
Oh, thank you so much. And is there the clicker? Oh, sorry. That's okay. Okay. So, good evening, Mayor Henderson and members of council. Thank you for having me again to provide you a bit of an update on where we've been over the course of this project, particularly since the last time I saw you here on January 27th. And so, tonight I'm just here to provide you a brief update on where we've been since that meeting on the 27th. And it's advancing itself, I'm sorry. And then talk to you about where we're going in terms of next steps. So again, I spoke to you about this last time. We were retained in late summer, early fall of 2019 to conduct a study in order to advance recommendations coming from the county's affordable housing strategy, which recommended at the local level the town implement a community improvement plan. And so in conjunction with SHS Consulting, we set out on a three-phase approach to the project. The first phase being background research and analysis, the second phase being development of the community improvement plan, and then the third phase being refinement and adoption of the CIP. And so to date, we are just entering phase 2, which is completing the draft CIP containing goals, objectives, vision, financial incentives, strategy, and implementation and monitoring. And in order to get to that CIP, we had conducted background research and analysis in conjunction with SHS Consulting, as well as had two open houses and meetings with key stakeholders. In December, we had the project launch event, which was well attended, and then we also launched the Engage Cobourg website, which had a number of survey tools as well as opportunities for long answer responses for residents to provide input that way. And then in early January, we met with two groups as more targeted stakeholder consultation to obtain input and feedback in order to identify some preliminary areas of focus. Through that work, we came up with 5 preliminary areas of focus, and then we went back out to the public at an open house in January, on January 23rd, to identify and prioritize those areas of focus. And so the draft background report should be uploaded to the website the week of March 23rd for public information and viewing. And as I had noted, There we go. So as I had noted, we had identified 5 key areas of focus under which we thought the CIP would have the most benefit, and that would be purpose-built rental, promoting smaller units, promoting mixed income housing, providing opportunities for second units, as well as providing incentives for emergency housing. So these are the 5 key areas of focus we went out and we engaged with the public on at the open house on January 23rd. And you'll recall I came here on the 27th, and so we had not yet analyzed all the feedback we received at that open house. So I will update you on the feedback of that open house now. It was very well attended. There was about 35 to 40 people in attendance, and there was, sorry, there was tabletop exercise as well as presentations, and at each table there were the 5 priority areas of focus in workbooks, and at the tables participants were asked to respond to questions on each of the 5 priority areas. In terms of the group discussion, the feedback we received was that purpose-built rental housing should be a priority of the CIP. The existing rental housing should be protected from conversion to condo or demolition or otherwise. And additional rental housing should be added to the city or to the town's market, and that's both at the affordable rate and market rate rental housing. Smaller units and second suites should both be incentivized, recognizing that there are smaller household sizes generally in the town due to the demographic composition. And a lot of the respondents had identified the second suites are very easy to implement, and it could be a quick win for the city to address housing need in the short term. In terms of the mixed income developments, there was a lot of discussion around ensuring that every community has availability of units on all ends of the housing continuum, and not just providing affordable housing units in one area or just trying to mix that more. Then there was discussion about a tiered approach to funding, so providing incentives. So if you do the maximum amount, let's say you provide 100% affordable units, and they're units that the town needs because the size or they're smaller units, which we know there's a need for, and you're implementing sustainability features and you're implementing universal design and accessibility features, you should receive more incentive or more funding than someone who maybe is only providing 50% affordable or not really hitting that sustainability or accessibility threshold. And then the final bit of feedback we received at that meeting was to consider opportunities to incentivize development which incorporates sustainable and or accessible design elements, and that was not just within affordable housing, but in any development we should be trying to incorporate these sustainable and accessible design features, and if there's any way to incentivize that, it would be something that the town should look into. As I said as well, we had engaged Cobourg, which was the online website for the project, and that ran with some polls and short answer open-ended feedback from early December when we launched on December 5th until the end of January of 2020. 282 total visits to the site during that time, and we received a lot of feedback in terms of what the priority areas for the CIP should be in terms of funding opportunities or ways you can incentivize development as well. We heard from the long-ended responses that sustainable urban design elements should be incorporated into projects and should be provided with loans or incentives. There was a lot of discussion about retrofits and infill redevelopment, particularly within brownfield areas, to include affordable housing. And there was preference for a town-wide mixed income approach versus concentrating affordable housing in one area of the town. So taking all that information, what we did was develop the CIP. And so the CIP is based on background research and best practice review, preliminary consultation, the town and the county objectives for housing as set out in the official plan and the affordable housing strategies, as well as a financial analysis completed by SHS. Those 4 elements really helped us zoom in on the areas of focus. And then following that, the late stage consultation, which would have been the January 23rd event, as well as further analysis of quantitative and qualitative findings, led to the draft of the CIP, which we are kind of in the stages of finalizing for public release in the coming weeks. What I'm going to do is give you a quick overview of what we're thinking of in terms of the base of the CIP and the funding available. And so based on all of that information, we have identified that the CIP should focus on 2 main priority areas, which is increasing the supply of purpose-built rental housing. And so that is housing in the primary market that was built and is intended to be built for rental, versus the secondary market, which would be things like secondary suites or people who rent houses. The second priority area is promoting the development of second suites. That being said, there are elements of the CIP that touch on the transitional and emergency housing, as well as smaller unit sizes and the accessibility elements and urban design elements that we know participants identified as important. And so in terms of incentive programs, what we're considering for promoting and increasing the supply of purpose-built rental housing is really 3 programs, which the first is the building of and planning fee waiver program, and that would provide anyone who is making an application for purpose-built rental housing, whether that's affordable or market, would be provided a waiver of those application fees. The next would be an affordable housing development charge grant program, and this is where the tiered sliding scale approach would come in. And so if your application comes forward and you're providing a certain number of affordable units, or you're providing a certain accessibility and sustainability threshold, you would be provided a higher waiver or reduction in the development charges than if you were to come in with something that, let's say, is maybe only 20% affordable, 80% market. That would be a lower reduction of the DCs. And then the third one we're considering or proposing for the CIP in terms of purpose-built rental would be the property tax grant program, and that would waive the property taxes for up to 5 years, and then you would recoup the costs through the increase in the assessment value later on when the project's completed. In terms of second suites, we have identified 2 programs for consideration. The first being planning and building fee reduction program, so similar to the affordable housing planning and building fee waiver. That would be the same, except they would not receive 100% of the fees waived. It would be a proportion of the fees waived, understanding that there is a need for the second units and they do address the housing issue. However, there is less control on the end of the municipality to ensure those units are rented into the market. And so for that reason, we are suggesting that there would be only up to a 50% reduction in those fees. And again, we know that the construction to retrofit your house to provide for a second suite is costly, and so there is a renovation and construction grant program being proposed, which would provide grants for the construction costs up to a maximum of a certain amount, and it would be fund matching. So it would, let's say the construction ended up costing $6,000, the municipality would provide $3,000 in a grant for that work, and that's how the grant program would work. And then under those other elements, we're looking again to provide planning and building fee waivers for shelter and emergency housing should there be an application to build a shelter or transitional housing in the town. We are also proposing an affordable housing planning and building fee reduction program, and this would be for affordable ownership housing in conjunction with a community organization. And so if Habitat for Humanity, for example, wanted to provide or build an affordable housing unit for someone to live in as an ownership housing, the fees for that application would be reduced. Again, the affordable housing and transitional housing development charge grant program, similar to the purpose-built rental housing grant program, we would be having a tiered approach where proportions of the development charges would be provided as a grant based on the performance of an application. So again, if they are providing sustainability or accessibility measures, or if they're at an affordability threshold that is below the $316,000, which is your ownership affordability threshold, they would get a higher proportion of that grant. And then in terms of the other elements which we know participants in the workshops identified as important, we are introducing a brownfield grant program. So that would be for developments on brownfield properties throughout the town for either affordable housing or otherwise, based on funding availability. And similarly, sustainability and accessibility grant program, which again would be provided and made available to people who may not necessarily be proposing affordable housing. They may be wanting to retrofit their business to make it more accessible for people, and we've introduced grants for that, again subject to funding. And that is kind of the framework we're looking at currently. It's still subject to review. It will be circulated to the Planning and Development Advisory Committee for further input and revisions. And then it will be made available to public for review and comment on the week of March 23rd is what we're targeting. And once that happens, there will be a public meeting and open house scheduled for April 14th to obtain further feedback. And so, in terms of next steps, we have a PDAC meeting scheduled for March 17th where we will be discussing the draft CIP in advance of broader circulation, and at this time we would address preliminary comments from the PDAC and then release the document to the public the week of March 23rd. We are scheduling stakeholder sessions on April 7th, and so we would be looking to meet with those same groups we met with in the early stage consultation back in January, which was the housing organizations as well as the local builder and developer and real estate group. Then we will have a public open house where we can provide information on the programs to the public in advance of the statutory public meeting. The statutory public meeting of council will be held on the same evening, April 14th. Following this time, we'll take all the feedback obtained through this next set of consultation and make refinements to the CIP as needed and bring it back to Committee of the Whole on May 11th for consideration. And then on May 19th at the regular council meeting, council would be making a decision on the CIP. And with that, I would open the floor up to any questions.
Members of council, questions, clarification? Councillor Chorley.
Thank you, Kelly, for updating us. It sounds like very positive progress. The question I had was about incentives for sustainable and accessible design. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the town of Cobourg is also updating our accessibility policy and multi-year accessibility plan, and we're also going to be developing a green development standard. So those policies may create certain rules for developments going forward. I'm just wondering, as you provide us with advice and a system of incentives, how are we going to make sure that those incentives work together with potentially the rules and policies that we might be creating so that we have a cohesive whole? Obviously, we don't want to incentivize elements of sustainable or accessible design that we could mandate through policy.
I can give a quick response and then perhaps Glenn can jump in, but what I would say is that under the CIP program there would be an evaluation criteria and a checklist that staff would be able to look to, and as part of that evaluation criteria, if they are implementing elements of these sustainable design guidelines or the standards, then they would be at a higher tier in the evaluation and subject to the funding.
Mr. McLaughlin?
If I may, Councillor Chorley, really the CIP provides the enabling legislation or the tool. So it's the vehicle to allow incentives to be issued under Section 28 of the Planning Act. So really it's whatever the municipality wishes and how it wishes to implement green development standards or accessibility provisions. It's really up to the municipality. So I think what is proposed under these programs is to provide that opportunity, and once the town's documents follow through with their own rules, we have the ability to implement as we see fit. Of course, even though we will be putting in, Kelly and I've talked about this a little bit before as well, currently Council doesn't have money set aside in the budget for incentives for brownfields or accessibility or sustainability as of yet, at least in 2020. So really the housing affordability budget line account is really dedicated to housing for 2020. In future years, Council will consider potentially other funding mechanisms to help implement the CIP and those other standards. So I think this really is the initial the vehicle to help move forward with those new rules.
Other questions? Councillor Beatty?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the update. It's really nice to see a project tracking as outlined. If my question's forthcoming in the draft document, that's fine. I just had to ask the question now. The lists of incentive programs for consideration on your third last slide, I believe, I really appreciate how comprehensive and the varying ranges of options. Understanding that this document is also going to have a financial analysis, and I'm sure, as you know, through our review, you know, our contribution in last year's budget and this year's budget for the CIP is what it is. How much does the financial analysis and the sustainability potential of a size of the municipality of Cobourg able to support these incentive programs? How much is that weighed into the variety or the level of the incentive programs that are going to be presented for consideration? So I guess in essence my question is, what's the complement between the financial analysis and the potential for Cobourg to sustain the CIP and then the incentive programs that are going to be presented for consideration?
Okay. A few questions in there. For the first part, I would say that as part of the background research and analysis, SHS did complete a financial analysis in what the affordability cost would be to an end user if things like development charges were waived and if building and planning application fees were waived. And what they determined was that the best value was really in the rental housing and promoting the development of rental housing. And so in developing the CIP, we did take that information and try to focus on the purpose-built rental, as we know that that is where the largest savings would be to the end user in terms of rental rates. And so that is contained within the background report as well as in the draft CIP report itself. In terms of financial, your other financial questions, I think we can take that back and look at that and get a bit of a more comprehensive response. But what I would say is that the funding would be kind of for certain things, if, for instance, the tax rebate, you would recoup those costs later on through the increase in the assessed value. And so, again, we can take this back and flesh it out and provide further details in the report. And then when we meet again in April and March.
Mr. McGlashan, do you have anything to add to that at this point, or?
Through you to Councillor Beattie, one of the results of the financial analysis that I think was gleaned out of it was the fact that municipal incentives alone really are not enough to really make a lot of these affordable housing projects viable. There needs to be a lot of reliance on other levels of government and other funding sources beyond just the municipality. So it really looks to be a excuse me, a partnership approach with other levels of government, being the county, the provincial government, and the CMHC through the federal government, in order to make this really hit home and allow these developments to happen. So that it certainly plays into it as well, and I think municipality obviously has to look at their financial capability and what level of commitment they will be wanting to put forward in budget every year. So that's certainly very important. I think, again, larger ticket items include development charges, of course, sometimes building permit fees for larger affordable housing apartment buildings can be fairly high, and tax increment financing, which you actually, as a municipality, don't necessarily get the impact from that financially right away. You're recouping the increased assessment over time, so you're just deferring some of that revenue. Another important part about second units, in fact, which is really deemed to be the easiest sort of lower hanging fruit, because you have existing housing stock that could be underutilized and could be better utilized with basement apartments or accessory secondary units. Those are relatively easy to implement. There is an initial outlay of cost by the homeowner. However, we feel through the incentive programs that maybe a little bit of assistance, maybe some seed money in the form of a grant or a loan can really assist people move forward with these projects. Under provincial legislation, Development Charges Act, DCs are already exempt for second units, so there's already a positive. So there's $17,000 that they don't have to provide because you're dealing with existing units. So definitely there are some financial implications for sure, and I think, as Kelly has indicated, there will be a little more detail provided in the background report on some test cases that they undertook from various types of affordable housing projects using real data from the municipality and financial data to just demonstrate that where these incentives, municipal incentives, will take them, and that there is more in terms of input required from other levels of government and sources. So it's definitely, when the background report is released in a couple of weeks, you'll see a lot of detailed information, and I think, as Ellie has indicated, certainly follow through on some of your questions.
Other questions, clarification, members of council? See none. Kelly, thank you very much for your presentation. Mr. Larmer.
Next, Your Worship, we have delegations, and we have Meaghan Macdonald, co-chair, and Kristina Nairn, Advocacy Subgroup Chair of Northumberland Affordable Housing Committee, regarding response to the November 25th, 2020 delegation received by Council to present the current state of housing and homelessness in Northumberland County.
Well, Meaghan and Kristina, I know you're very familiar with our council chambers, so again, welcome, and we look forward again to your delegation.
Thank you very much, and actually we also have Neil Ellis, a member of our committee, joining us, and he's going to start.
Thanks, Meaghan. Your Worship and Council, thank you for the invitation to be here. The Northumberland Affordable Housing Committee, which is a local initiative comprised of organizations and volunteers who are interested in affordable housing. We're comprised of about 25 active community partners who, for the most part, are agencies that in their work address income and housing security issues. This thing's sticky. And we went 2 slides. All right. We're going to start with a definition on what affordable housing is. And this is a definition that's provided for us by CMHC. The cost of adequate housing should not exceed 30% of household income. Housing that costs less than this is considered affordable. And this is a fairly standard thing. When I worked in the financial industry, this is the number I worked with when I was deciding if someone could afford to get a mortgage or not. What you'll see in the coming slides is that this 30% number has actually been rendered meaningless in a lot of situations, and you'll see that as Kristina and Meaghan talk about some of the numbers and the situations that are before us. Is that yes, it's a definition that works until it doesn't.
Do you want to just do it? Thanks, Neil. So this isn't news, the state of affordable housing in this community, but here are some stats that just provide a bit of a picture as to what people are currently facing. 12.9% of adults and 19.2% of children in Cobourg live with low income. What that means is we're finding people with average incomes are struggling to be able to find housing. So if you're living low income, it's pretty much impossible. Average available market rents are unattainable for anybody living with low income. The average house price currently is $454,000, which is out of the range of an average household income of $90,000. Over 50% of tenant households are spending 30% or more of their income on shelter costs. And currently we have a 9-year wait list for RGI housing. Really, if we summarize it, we have an affordable housing shortage, and it's becoming a crisis for many people in our community. And Neil spoke about the 30%. To be under 30% of gross annual household income, low and moderate income households need to find rental for $1,019 in Cobourg to be able to afford it. If you look right there, that's just from May to July 2019. I'm sure many of our colleagues would say those are still increasing, but people are not finding a 1-bedroom for less than $1,200. 3 bedrooms, $1,500 to $1,900, and it's pretty common to see us getting into the 2,000s. The summary is what people need doesn't exist, and so they have no options. The other key challenge that people are facing is that incomes are not keeping up with these costs as well. This is a really great chart, and I just want to highlight 2 of them. It's a lot of information, but if you look at 2 examples of a lot of the demographic in Cobourg, the first is 1 full-time minimum wage earner, and we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of incomes we have in our community. But if you look at that second column, a total monthly income of $3,633, even at $1,775 for rent, they're paying 49% of their income on their housing. There's not much left to make ends meet at the end. The other demographic I want to highlight is at the very end, a senior on old age security. We all know that we do have a large senior population in our community. At $1,727, 61% of their income on housing. Just to have 1,060 1-bedroom, which we showed you, doesn't exist. So I always speak about the housing continuum. Many have heard me talk a lot about how much I believe in the housing continuum and how much it's so important to have housing all across the continuum. And it's really great for us to be here presenting the same night as the CIP. The challenge that we are seeing right now in our community is the housing continuum isn't working in so many cases because there's nothing to move to. So transitioning from one spot on the continuum is almost impossible. When you have a 9-year wait for subsidized housing, you can't transition. When your average market price is $454,000, transitioning people into market ownership is almost impossible. So what we're really finding is there's a backlog all along the housing continuum. So as we look at how do we solve this problem, we keep saying we have to have an influx, and I love the focus on rental housing, but we keep saying it has to be all across the continuum. We have to focus on all areas. That's the only way to get people moving through it. Thanks, Neil. So income is the key determining factor in attaining housing. It's the key determining factor of health and well-being. When incomes don't keep pace with costs, the basic needs of housing and food aren't met. Employment is often spoken about as the answer or the key out of poverty, but 8 out of 10 of the top job postings in Northumberland County in 2017 paid under a living wage. So one's employment in Northumberland is not enough to afford the basic needs necessarily. So when the root causes of homelessness, mental health and addictions issues such as trauma, which you see up there, aren't addressed, when those aren't addressed, those root causes and those key pieces, the cycles of poverty and homelessness aren't broken. And we often look for a cog in that wheel, somewhere to go in and break that cycle. But when there is nowhere to rent and when it isn't affordable, evictions and homelessness increase. And we're reaching a waiting list. Meaghan mentioned it's 9 years. There's almost 1,000 households on that for rent geared to income. That's why it's almost 9 years. So people are desperately in need of housing that meets their income levels. When individuals are judged, marginalized, and excluded in their communities, that substantially increases their level of stress, and the health outcomes worsen, continuing that cycle and really impacting our emergency services. Next slide. There's a Trent University study that was done fairly recently on Northumberland. It's called The Lived Experience of Homelessness in a Small Town or Rural Area, from Homelessness to Home. And it interviewed 19 individuals in Northumberland County who have been homeless and found housing to share their experiences. It's a qualitative study, and the study found that increasing complexity to individuals' situations because of chronic long-term homelessness is what we're seeing in this community. Co-occurrence of mental health addictions, physical health issues, and the lack of resources to service are also issues. In the interviews, all reported a history of previous trauma. Participants reported the main challenge for them were debilitating levels of stress. 18 out of 19 had experience with emergency shelters. The note their biggest barriers: social isolation, stigma, and judgment by landlords, public, and even those working in the field who are there supposedly to help them. Key things that help them to get housing: cell phones, internet access, new social networks, self-advocacy, and word of mouth. Most spoke about the importance of having community connections. Local trends noted by our Affordable Housing Committee members are the increased numbers of seniors that was mentioned and youth experiencing homelessness or at high risk of homelessness. One committee member said when we asked to come here today, she said, "We see an increase in seniors having serious housing issues, loss of partners resulting in decreased income, evictions, and inability to stay where they are because of their decreased mobility. Younger seniors losing their jobs, yet not able yet to collect CPP, and then can't afford to live where they are. They don't have first and last month's rent, and that is a big barrier as well. As soon as they have to leave where they are, they can't afford the new rental prices." Statements about the biggest challenges seen by local agencies on our community. Some said this: coming up with first and last month's rent, credit and background checks, and having no youth shelter. Income, OW, ODSP, and minimum wage, they are not enough to afford rent and food. There are large gaps in the housing continuum, as Meaghan pointed out, and we can't move people along it. Continuously rising rental prices. The Northumberland Affordable Housing Committee strongly recommends living wages, building affordable and RGI housing, education for communities to decrease stigma and judgment. Now, I'm usually the one who brings up the negative statistics, so I want to leave you before I move on back to them. The successes. There are also a tremendous amount of successes in our community. Hundreds of households have received assistance from our committee agencies, such as the Help Center, Greenwood Coalition, Salvation Army, Transition House, Cornerstone, Rebound, the Community Mental Health Association, and the community mental health outreach services that we have locally, and many, many others on our committee who work tirelessly to support and to house those who are homeless or at high risk. County Community and Social Services spend over $220,000 with their housing allowance program, with almost 100 families or households benefiting. Our committee is growing with members who are consistent, committed, and coordinating their work to get and keep people housed. And this is also the first time we've had county and municipal affording housing plans with all levels of government concerned and showing an interest in working together to create change, not to mention the CIP. So some of the things that we provided you with are some recommended guiding resources. Here, there's two, and I'd like to take a second to just read an excerpt from the second one, which is AMO's Fixing the Housing Affordability Crisis from August 2019. All Ontarians experiencing homelessness need immediate access to permanent housing alongside services and supports that will help them get back on their feet. Investing in housing-first approaches and supports will generate savings in the long run. Homeless Ontarians are more frequent users of costly services such as ambulance, hospitals, and correctional facilities. According to the Homelessness Hub, a single shelter bed costs Canadian provinces about $1,932 a month. A provincial jail cell costs $4,333 a month, and a hospital bed costs $10,919. Given these costs, it is significantly cheaper to provide these Ontarians with stable housing and the supports they need to stay off the streets. We also provided with the next slide some other recommended guiding resources, and we're really proud to be here, and as Kristina said, to be here and to actually be talking about the fact that there is a Northumberland County affordable housing, and there is a strategy, and there's a Town of Cobourg affordable housing strategy. We commend you for that, and we really look forward to the implementation of those strategies. As well, there's the 10-year housing and homelessness plan and the Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland drug strategy community priorities.
So these are all those, and these are guiding resources for us, and I hope that they're guiding resources for you as well. AMO puts out excellent pieces for you. So these ones certainly are excellent resources supporting the need for affordable housing. And I too am going to quote the commission that was consulted on for the Ontario Human Rights. And they said, without appropriate housing, it is often not possible to get and keep employment. And I think we see that quite a bit now with our employers being quite concerned about the cost of housing. To recover from mental illness or other disabilities is near impossible when you don't have housing. To integrate into the community, to escape physical or emotional violence, or to keep custody of children, again, impossible without that base right of housing. The right to shelter, to have one's own bed to sleep in, a roof over one's head, a place where one is safe is a human right. It's essential to the preservation of one's dignity, and although it's often wondered why I'm here as a nurse, it's important and a key determinant of health.
Back to me. As has been mentioned, we support a housing first model, and the definition there from the Housing Hub on about that the basic underlying principle of housing first is that people are better able to move forward with their lives when they are housed first, when they have those shelters, and when they have that shelter, I should say, and supports that come with having a house, a place to call home, a place to go, a place of security, that everything else flows out from that. But when they're not housed, when they're transient, those things can't exist, and we end up having the problems that we're experiencing within our community. And so we really do advocate a housing model first, and we hope to see that, hearing that in the CIP, to see how that comes forward more with the town. I want to thank you for inviting us to come out and be here tonight. It's problems in our community that have led the council to say, hey, we want to hear from these various organizations, one of which being the Northumberland Affordable Housing Committee. If you're paying attention at all, you would note that we haven't been before you as a committee since before the previous municipal election. That hasn't been because of a lack of interest or engagement. It's been because the previous council, as it was going out, and the incoming council, we felt got it and understood the problems that were plaguing our community. We didn't feel we need to come back and advocate and educate the council. It doesn't mean that the problem has gone away. It does not mean that things have gotten better or improved. The last 6 months would indicate otherwise. Things are not getting better. And there are certain things that are outside of council's control and what we can do about that. Council can't control the minimum wage or what living wage is in the county beyond what's paid to its own employees. Nor can you control the amount of money that is funded through social services that the county receives. That is outside of your control and your purview. But you can, with other municipalities, advocate on behalf of this community and other communities to other levels of government to note that there is a deficit, that we have bankrupted our social services sector, and that the supports are not there to support the problems that our community and every other community, I dare say, is plaguing. And so I would encourage you to think about that. What can we do? How can we be bold? What risks can we take? It might mean that Joe Public doesn't like it, but if we can make those investments, if we can take risks, if we can make decisions that will get a housing first model going, if we can really get behind the CIP and advocate and implement these policies, we can start to make a dent on these things. It might cost us in the short term, but if we can think long-term and invest long-term and act quickly and aggressively and with purpose, I think we can make a difference in our community. Certainly, continuing as we are will not fix anything. The problem will continue to spiral. Thanks for your time. We're free to take any questions that you may have.
And before I take questions, just for members' understanding, Reverend Ellis also sits on the board of the Northumberland County Housing Committee as well, so he's one of the directors as well and is heavily engaged in that conversation as well. Any questions of clarification from members of council? Councillor Chorley?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking time out and briefing us, giving us a good understanding of the situation. But I would like to put a few tough questions to the committee, because when council invited you to come, it was in response to a group of Cobourg residents who are called the Good Neighbors Coalition, who raised concerns about Transition House being operated as a low barrier facility. So I'm not just wondering if you've had a chance to look at the Good Neighbor Coalition, their specific recommendations to council, and if you have any reaction to those.
Yes, as speaking as the co-chair of the Affordable Housing Committee, alongside Nancy Johnston, who's the other co-chair, we did take a look, but we felt very much that Transition House is a member of the Northumberland Affordable Housing Committee. And also, we did not feel comfortable coming here and speaking specifically to recommendations about another agency in our community. So we were very clear when we the mandate that we got from the committee to come here was to provide context and to provide information, but not to actually comment specifically on those recommendations, as it was dealing with an agency that sits at the table of our committee.
Other questions, clarification? Well, thanks, three of you, very much for your delegation. Mr. Larmer, we're next. Let's do delegation action, if we may. Number one, Councillor Beattie, I'll go over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The action recommended is that Council receive the presentation from the Northumberland Affordable Housing Committee for information purposes, and further that Council request the Municipal Clerk to forward the NAHC's presentation to Northumberland County Community and Social Services, Cobourg Police Services, and the Good Neighbors Coalition as follow-through correspondence related to the November 25th, 2019 delegation action received by Council. I included the second part as I just think it's important that the other stakeholders that were related to that circle of information, in case they haven't seen on the agenda, that they just formally receive the presentation from the town of Cobourg.
Is there any member of council wishes that read once more, or are we fine to proceed? Seeing none, that's before us. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And on part two, I know it crosses many portfolios, but at this point, Councillor Beattie, I'll probably go back to you because the affordable piece, knowing it has a connection to CIP indirectly, if I may.
Thank you, Worship. If I may, just clarification through you to the clerk. Because it was a presentation, is there an action recommended?
Okay. Mr. Larmer?
Next, Your Worship, we have reports. We have General Government Services. We have Chair Deputy Mayor Sagan.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. The first item under General Government Services is a memo from the Treasurer, Interim Chief Administrative Officer regarding the 2019 final report on the cancellation, reduction, or refund of taxes. The action recommended that Council receive the second and final property tax adjustment report for 2019 and approve the reduction of property taxes in the amount of $56,541.82. And the breakdown of that amount is the Town of Cobourg, $23,754.54, the County of Northumberland, $13,528.89, Education, $19,258.39, and nothing for the DBIA. I'll ask for any comments or questions from members of council. Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Motion is carried. Second item is a memo from the Treasurer, Interim Chief Administrative Officer regarding the Town of Cobourg Annual Repayment Limited, ARL. The action recommended that Council receive the memo from the Treasurer, Interim Chief Administrative Officer, and the letter from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing Information Purposes. Any questions from member of Council? No, thank you. I'll call the report. Vote, all in favor? Motion is carried. The third is a memo from the Municipal Clerk, Manager of Legislative Services regarding the Municipal Modernization Program, Intake 1, Town of Cobourg Municipal Service Delivery Review Project, Third-Party Contractor Approval, KPMG. Action recommended that Council receive the report for information purposes and further that Council supports the provincial investment in municipalities to undertake municipal service delivery expenditures by an independent third party for the purpose of finding savings and efficiencies, and further that Council enter into an agreement with KPMG to act as the town's third-party reviewer to review the Town of Cobourg's municipal service delivery expenditures for the purpose of finding savings and efficiencies as outlined within the expression of interest submitted to the provincial government on December 5th, 2019. And further that Council endorse the provincial funding received as part of the town's successful application in the amount of $86,496 as part of the Municipal Modernization Program Intake 1 to be administered by KPMG and presented to Council by July-August 2020. And further that Council authorize the preparation of a bylaw to be endorsed and presented to Council at a regular Council meeting authorizing the Mayor and Municipal Clerk to enter into a transfer payment agreement with the Province of Ontario for a Municipal Modernization Project. Any questions from member of Council? Councillor Charlie?
Thank you. I do have a question, and it's regarding the appointment of KPMG as the third-party reviewer. First of all, I'm really pleased that this funding is being granted by the province. I definitely think that we need that third-party reviewer. My question is about us forfeiting our purchasing policy, where normally we would go through an RFP process to select that service, that third-party reviewer. Now, I understand in the staff report there were some tight deadlines from the province, so I can understand the staff recommendation that we forfeit the RFP process and today appoint KPMG and give them the role. But I had a closer look at the transfer payment agreement, which is the second link on the agenda. And I was just wondering if perhaps Interim CAO Ian Davey or perhaps the clerk could just clarify some of the deadlines that were mentioned in the report. On page 21, it says the recipient will submit a draft of the independent third-party reviewers report to the province by August 31st. And under Schedule F on page 24, it says there's an interim progress report due to the province on June 15th, and the final report is due to the province on September 18th. And for the interim report, not a lot is required, simply an update regarding the cost of the project and a statement indicating whether the recipient has retained the independent third-party reviewer. So I'm just wondering, is it really necessary that we go ahead and appoint KPMG right away, or is there time for us to go through an RFP process just to make sure that we're getting the best value for this service and that we're getting a fair and independent evaluation?
Thank you, Councillor Troy. I think I'll go to the clerk and I'll follow that to Mr. Davies, and then we can go back to Councillor Troy.
So if Ms. Davey allows me to, I can provide a little bit of explanation on that for him and myself. So yeah, there's a bit of a timeline. The original date for the submission was to be presented to us on our submission that was due December 5th, 2019, at the very start of February, or actually the end of January. With that, we waited and waited and waited, and the province awarded all the joint submissions. So you will see in last council session, council approved the information purposes, the fire service delivery joint one. So I think there's about 42 of those of the province that were automatically approved for the service delivery report. So again, that's 42, and the majority of those reports are actually service delivery reviews in the province of Ontario. Almost every municipality in Ontario, 404, applied for this $1.3 billion of monies for grants for efficiencies and effectiveness, which is a lot of service delivery reports. The second round, which we were approved in on February 24th, is about 47 municipalities were approved, and we are one of them. Again, most of them were service delivery reports. And I've heard from the province as well, there'll be a third round as well, which will be a number of other municipalities will be approved for this program. So when you think of it, we are not, through the recommendation is we're not forfeiting our RFP. What we're doing is we're providing under provision a recommendation from staff to single source it as is allowed under purchasing policy with council approval of a third party, which is KPMG. Which is our third-party external auditor as it is. So that company has been with us for a number of years, and Ian Davey can talk a little bit more as a treasurer for audits, but it wouldn't be their company, the auditors actually doing the services, would be another part of a KPMG that we'd be doing, but working closely to get understanding of our entire corporation and our operations. With that being said, you probably could have up towards almost 100 municipalities doing service delivery reports looking for third-party providers. So it would be a big competition privately for this purpose, as well as most of these third parties would know exactly what is given by the province of the $86,000. So most likely their bids will be at the $86,000 margin or whatever that municipality has approved. So really the competitiveness of it would be based on the qualifications. KPMG is a well-known external agency that provides the services, and actually doing research, and I probably should have provided my report, but they have done a number of these. They actually have done over a number of them from the previous efficiencies funding, which was for large urban centers at the start, latter half, or the start of 2019 as well. So they're well known, as well as they've done the services as well. Getting back to the timelines, so there is 3 timelines. There used to be 2. One was a draft report submitted to the province, as well as a service delivery draft report from the third party, delivered to the province by June 15th. But because of the delay, the province has pushed that draft report to August 31st, 2020, with the final report coming September of 2020. Or the requirement to be made public of September 2020. Trying to get these straight. Councillor Troy is correct that June 15th is required to put forward a report to the province on the cost of the third-party evaluator. So if council does award this KPG, we go out to them and get a cost estimate for what it would cost, as well as how long it will take. Preliminary discussions with just talking with KPG of how they've done it in the past and the history with these with other organizations. The town of Cobourg submitted for entire corporate-wide service delivery report, which is quite the undertaking as well. They've provided that they can have something to council by the end of June in May, and a final report probably just at the end of June or July and August, which for what council has planned in the strategic plan as well as the budget requirements is org review to come later in the early fall as well, so it might meet the requirements too. If we do RFP, you're looking at 2 months down the road for the process to come, to the RFP process to go through to the evaluations, as well as another couple months because we don't meet in the summer for council, so it could delay the process as well. So staff has put this recommendation forward.
Do you have anything to add, Mr. Davey?
The only, the only thing I would add is that, as Mr. Larmer indicated, the extension of the timeline is not really adding any time to the process. It's really just making up for the delay that the province incurred on us by delaying the announcement of the project. The actual time to get the work done, as it turns out, is still going to be about the same, but to get to mid-September to have a final product.
Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Darling?
No, I would just like to add, as having read this report and whatnot, I'm very comfortable with KPMG as they are our auditors and are very familiar with the runnings of the town. So I think their thorough knowledge may add to the fact that we'll get a very good product in the end.
Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Charlie, did you have an amendment, or was that just a comment that you were making?
No, I appreciate the explanation. I think it's important for the public to hear that so they understand why we're single sourcing this.
Thank you. There are no further questions. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Motion is carried. Number 4 under General Government is a memo from the Municipal Clerk, Manager of Legislative Services regarding the creation of a Deputy Clerk, Records Management Coordinator position in the Legislative Services Municipal Clerks Department. Action recommended that Council receive the report from the Municipal Clerk, Manager of Legislative Services for information purposes, and further that Council approve the creation of a permanent full-time position in the Legislative Services Department being Deputy Clerk / Records Management Coordinator, replacing the current Records and Committee Coordinator titled position. And as you see in the report, there is no implication for any increased amount in the 2020 budget. There will be in the 2021 budget. Any questions from members of council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Motion is carried. And the final item is a memo from the Interim Human Resources Manager regarding the Certified Living Wage Employer Report for the Corporation of the Town of Cobourg. I've asked the clerk, I have a minor revision to the motion in front of you, and it is the action recommended that Council receive the Living Wage Certification Report from the Interim Human Resources Manager for information purposes, and further that since Council has not received any terms of reference for the Ontario Living Wage Network, more information be provided to Council about this organization and certification process, and any annual fees be referred for discussion in the 2021 budget. My reasoning for this is that we have a potential $400 fee that is payable to this company, and I could only find 2 employees that work for the Ontario Living Wage Network, and I just feel that Council needs to do its due diligence and find more information. And as the fee was not in the 2020 budget, we have a bit of time moving forward. And as we heard tonight from Reverend Ellis, that we don't really have control a lot of the time over the wages. But it's a simple motion to leave it on the table and to look at it again for the 2020 budget. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Beattie?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Well, I heard from Reverend Niels that we don't write the living wage. I think we have an opportunity to influence and, more importantly, participate and recognize. I think there's over half a dozen municipalities who have taken this initiative and taking a stand in promoting living wage in their communities as an identified social determinant of health. With respect to your observation about the budget, if I may, Deputy Mayor, through you to the interim CAO, not to put you on the spot, Mr. Davey, but would there be, do you foresee where in the budget, if this was to go forward for 2020, where the town could possibly find the $400 to support this application if it was to go forward?
Yes, Deputy Mayor, through you to the councillor, I think the amount of the $400 could certainly be found either in our contingency fund or perhaps the mayor's budget or something like that. So I don't think that the $400 in and of itself is necessarily a stopper here. I think it's important that when we refer back to the excuse me, the original motion that came out of council on December 2nd, it asked that council direct staff to provide a report to council for March the 9th that outlines the process and requirements to become a certified living wage employer, including what percentage of full-time and part-time employees are paid a living wage or above. And so I think that was certainly what was addressed in the report, that we are, the town of Cobourg is meeting those requirements. So I think the issue of actually joining the organization or paying the fee, whether it's now or whether it's in 2021, I think the report has established that the question that was asked of it by council.
Mayor Henderson?
Yes, through you, Chair. I appreciate your amendment, but I don't consider the wage increase significant. To me, it's not wage related or increase related. It's the message we want to send. I realize the more I read, we have to somewhere move or promote living wage, because what I'm learning from so many organizations, minimum wage just doesn't seem to be meeting today's need. So I'd like to believe through some inventive financing that we have access to, even through my mayor's budget. I'm willing to look at that, bring something back through Mr. Davey or General Garment, how that could be looked at with discussion. But I'd rather not wait a whole year, because my premise is really easy. We either support a living wage or we don't. And in my case, I have to tell you, I support a living wage. When I hear people have minimum wage, I sometimes wonder how they do it. So I am in support of the motion as it presents, but I do appreciate the point you're trying to make.
To that point, Mayor Henderson, I was just trying to, I think we can do this internally. I don't think we need an external group to tell us how to give a living wage. And so that was basically the premise of the change. So that I'm just not impressed with this Ontario Living Wage Network. I don't think that they've got the capability. We certainly heard tonight we have a lot of people in this town, in this county, that could bring something forward without us paying money to an external network that I really don't think that they have the wherewithal to bring this forward. Councillor Beattie?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And if I may have to respectfully disagree with your comments, I actually think the Ontario Living Wage Network across Canada is actually recognized at establishing a certification that is informed based on social science, economic, and consensus data. Furthermore, this has been supported through AMO. Significant municipalities are equal to our size and greater have endorsed this. And I think we need to go back to the interim CAO's point about where this was directed from in December. Really what we're doing is it's similar to maybe someone joining a manufacturers association or a rubber stamp on something else. It's not an internal consultant coming in and telling us where we're at and what we pay. What we're essentially doing is we qualify, we meet the requirements of the leader level, and really what we're doing is we're just applying as just the town of Cobourg, not the municipality wide, but we're just applying as the town of Cobourg. That's saying we recognize that we pay our employees a living wage as defined by the leader level indicates. So I don't think we're in a position to question the merit of this, of the Living Wage Network.
Fair enough. I just, I still believe that we have some work to do on this before we go forward. If there's no, Councillor Charlie, sorry.
I do have a few questions about this. One is that the staff report said that there was no fee for joining this certification program, and there are still questions about fees. So I would appreciate if there was a little bit of clarity about exactly what fees we're signing up to.
In the report, I did call the Ontario Living Wage Network, and yes, there is a fee. It depends on whether you're a nonprofit or a profit store, in other words, or a business or a municipality. And for a municipality our size, it is an annual fee of $400. It's based on if we have full and part-time people, more than 250 employees, which we do. And that basically gives us a certificate and a decal to put on our front door. I just can't see this as something that we can't, we do know that this town pays excellent wages. Councillor Darling brought forward a motion a month or so ago that we'd look at the non-union, and we did do that. And I think we treat our staff fairly, and the living wage certainly is something that Cobourg, the town of Cobourg, is very proud of. But that it is in the reports from this group that it's a scale of fees, and 30% of their income, I guess, is based on fees. So I did talk to both the communications coordinator and the executive director. I could only find 2 people in the Ontario version. So that was the breakdown I had. Mr. Davey?
Yes, just for further clarification, when we started this project and we first met with people regarding the living wage, obviously one concern was would there be an impact on our budget in order to meet one of these levels? And that impact, at no time did we look at that as what would the fee be to join this group. In my mind, the issue was, were we currently meeting the requirements of the living wage, or would we need to look at some sort of pay adjustment to our staff? So in terms of the report, I have to admit that when I was reviewing and signing off on this report and indicating that there would be no financial implications, I certainly wasn't thinking about a $400 potential fee to join the group. I was thinking that there wouldn't be any financial implications in terms of salary reviews or salary increases or salary changes that would be significant to the municipality. So that was the rationale behind why the report says that there are no financial implications.
Councillor Charlie?
I think my second question is about what meaningful impact this certification is going to have on our practices. As I read through it, I think it's important to look at the detail of this certification. It sounds nice to be a living wage employer. I appreciate the intent. I think the intent is to support low-income families or individuals who are working hard to make ends meet but struggling to make ends meet, and I can appreciate that. But for the town of Cobourg, how this applies to us, I think this initiative is a little self-defeating. I'm just struggling to understand what the benefits are to signing up to this, especially if there are fees involved, because the group we know about, which is the staff that we pay for the corporation, we know they are well paid, they're compensated well above living wage standard. The group that are not covered by this certification include members of council, students, interns. They are all excluded from this certification, and they are the groups that are traditionally falling below the living wage standard. In particular, members of council, councillors are paid less than the living wage, and councillors are paid less than the minimum wage, but they are not covered by this certification. So I'm struggling to understand how, by signing up to the certification, it's sparking any meaningful impact or any progressive change. I'm open to hearing how this is going to spark any kind of change.
Anyone have anyone to comment on that? Not seeing any hands go up. Mayor Henderson?
Just to be clear, is your amendment still on the floor? I'm just asking for clarity.
It's not an amendment, it's the motion it's a substitute motion.
Thank you.
Yes, it is still on the floor. Yeah. Councillor Beattie, followed by Councillor Darling.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to the clerk, I understand that this is the motion on the floor. But to the clerk, can you just remind me if I wanted to go back to, if I wanted to pursue that we apply for the leader level, is that a notice of amendment to the original motion? Okay, thank you. I'll allow you, sorry, not allow. I'll take a moment, thank you.
Councillor Darling.
Yes, I've just been listening to the conversation here. Excuse me. In reading the conclusion in the report, it says we are at the leader level. And again, I kind of got to concur with Councillor Chorley here. Like, what are the benefits? We know we're at the leader level. So by putting a stamp and paying $400, is that going to get us any more? Is it going to do anything more for us as a community? I think I kind of agree with the mayor here that we can accept this motion as it is, and if we want to look at this in future, nothing stops us from looking at it in the future. We're at the leader level. We're doing just what they say we should be doing, and it gives council and staff time to look into the committees and decide later on if we want to join it and apply for certification at that time.
Mayor Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to Councillor Darling for clarity, I wasn't, just to be clear, I'm not in support of the motion. I'm in support of the original motion, and we can certainly discuss perhaps through general government about any additional fees later on, what that looks like, because right now we don't have enough information. That's something I consider to Deputy Mayor, that might be considered in general government, but right now the way it stands, I'm not in support of the motion before, so I just want to be clear on that.
Councillor Chorley.
I appreciate Councillor Darling's views, and I agree we need more clarity on the fees that we would be committing to before we can move forward. So I'm comfortable with the motion that's put on the floor. I think it will allow us the time to consider all of the implications and the fees involved.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to, and I appreciate Councillor Chorley's question about what are some of the benefits of living wage, and I just quickly looked up the Living Wage Canada Network, which has a summary of both economic and social benefits. And I think, you know, we have to go back to what we heard from our leading social determinant of health nurse here, Kristina Nairn, in Northumberland County. And income is the leading social determinant of health in Canada. And according to Living Wage Canada, employers, municipalities, and nonprofits, by committing to the declaration, even if they are paying a living wage, by formalizing it through a certification process, is a commitment not only to themselves and their employees, but a commitment to the overall broader social and community well-being of their community, and thus stimulating an ongoing conversation about the ongoing building capacity for the livelihood of their citizens. With that said, if I may, Deputy Mayor, I'd like to put a notice of motion on the floor, or notice to amend. I can do that at this time. Thank you. And that notice to amend reads as action recommended that Council receive the report from the Interim Human Resources Manager for information purposes, and further that Council authorize staff to complete the steps necessary to achieve the leader level of a living wage certification. So essentially it's the original motion, but that's the wording of the notice to amend.
Any further comments? Councillor Chorley.
Again, I appreciate the intent of a living wage, and I think definitely we could have a long discussion about living wage as an approach to helping members of our community who are struggling to make ends meet. But it's interesting, just as Councillor Beattie mentioned, income as a key determinant of health. I also wrote that down from the presentation we received tonight. but in my statistics class, the very first thing they taught us was correlation doesn't imply causation. Yes, there's a correlation between income and health, low income and poorer health, higher income and better health outcomes. But that doesn't mean that you can automatically fix health by increasing income. There's a correlation, but it doesn't necessarily mean causation. And I think we need to be careful about that. And we have to be specific about how this certification program applies to the town of Cobourg. And because there's a lack of clarity about the fees involved, I don't fully understand what we are committing to in terms of a financial commitment. I can't support the amendment that's on the floor at the moment.
Any further discussion? Oh, Councillor John.
Yes, I just question back to you, Deputy Mayor. I see the third one here, I think it is third, is champion level. Did you inquire if there's fees if you proceed to the next step? What happens at that stage?
Every level has the same amount of fees, $400 a year, given our size of our municipality, and it's renewed annually. It's an annual fee. So if there's no further questions, I'm going to call the vote on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? That's the amendment, which is the original. Yeah, all in favor of the amendment, which is in fact the original motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated. So basically going back to the amendment that's on the floor, any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. And that's it for general government.
Mr. Larmer?
Next, Your Worship, we have Planning and Development Services and reports. We have Chair Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Larmer. The memo from the Secretary of the Planning and Development Advisory Committee. This is regarding the Planning and Development Advisory Committee's recommendation on the proposed natural waterfront park for the West Harbour. And the action recommended is that Council receive the recommendation for the Planning and Development Advisory Committee, PDAC, for information purposes. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. I have two. My apologies. I was getting off easy this week. The additions. The second one is a notice of hearings of the Committee of Adjustment and Planning staff reports for the March 10th, 2020 Committee of Adjustment meetings regarding file number A-01-20, and this is an application for a minor variance at 232 James Street East, and file B-01-20, and this is for an application of consent at 1111 Elgin Street for Trinity Northumberland, Inc. And the action recommended is that Council receive the notices and planning staff reports for information purposes. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.
Next, Your Worship, we have Public Works Services. We have Chair Councillor Brian Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Larmer. First here, I have a memo from the Director of Public Works regarding the execution of a transfer payment agreement for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, Rural and Northern Stream, for the King Street West structural culvert replacement. The action recommended that Council authorize the preparation of a bylaw to be endorsed and presented to Council for adoption at a regular Council meeting to authorize the Mayor and Municipal Clerk to execute an agreement between the Town of Cobourg and Her Majesty the Queen in right of Ontario as represented by the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP. Supplement rural and northern stream infrastructure for the King Street West Cobourg Structural Culvert Replacement Project. Are there any questions in regard to this issue? Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. The second memo from the Manager of Environmental Services regarding repairs to the biosolids holding tanks north and south located at the Water Pollution Control Plant 1. And the action recommended that council approve the repairs to the biosolids hold tanks at Plant 1 and authorize the work to be completed by Criterio Services at a cost of $77,056.74. Price includes non-refundable HST to be funded through the approved $85,000 in the 2020 Environmental Services capital budget. Is there any questions in regard to this issue? Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And unfortunately, item 3 is a letter of resignation from Anneke Russell, and she is a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee. And the action recommended that council accept with regret the resignation from Anneke Russell of the Transportation Advisory Committee, and that a note of appreciation be sent to the member acknowledging her service to the community, and further that the vacant position be advertised and a new member be recruited in accordance with the town's policies and procedures. Is there any questions in regard to this issue? Okay, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you.
Mr. Larmer?
Next, Your Worship, we have Parks and Recreation Services, and we have Chair Councillor Emily Chorley.
Thank you. Item 1, memo from the Director of Community Services regarding the evaluation of a citizen proposal for the creation of a natural heritage waterfront park located at the Ecology Garden, West Beach, West Headland, and West Harbour, Cobourg waterfront. The action recommended, I'm going to read a much simpler action, and this is because the Willow Beach Field naturalists are very keen to come to council and provide their feedback on the report, but they are looking for more time to digest the 72-page report. So the action I'm going to put on the floor is that council receive the staff report for information purposes, and further that council consider feedback on the report from the Willow Beach Field naturalists at a future meeting. Are there any questions or comments from members of council? Yes, Deputy Mayor Meaghan.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. I think we do need more time. This is a big item, and I look forward to hearing another presentation, and hopefully by the end of this term we can finalize this very important part of our waterfront. So I'm in support of your revised motion.
Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
Mr. Larmer?
Next, Your Worship, we have unfinished business, and we have then the Committee of the Whole open forum.
Are there any comments about unfinished business at this point before I move to the other? See none from members of council. We did put out a form earlier from the clerk. Is there anybody who would like to speak now at the Committee of the Whole forum, or any member of the media or gallery who may be on the list with the clerk? So listed. I see our clerk is searching. That's right. Is there anybody who wishes to come to the diocese? See none. That Mr. Larmer takes us to closed session, so I'll move, if I may, to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. The council meeting closed session in accordance with Section 239(2)(b) of the Municipal Act 2001 regarding Section 239(2) personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or board employees. 1, Civic Awards Committee applications, and 2, Holco Board Nominating Committee recommendations. Section 239(1)(c), a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality of local board, sale of municipal lands on municipal public highway.
All those in favor? Carried.